Yeah. No, that's not it. All right. Yes. Boom. I'm live. All right. So, okay. So how did I almost kill a 40-year-old company? I'm going to tell you exactly how. First of all, obviously wasn't intentional. I didn't set out to set out to do that, to do all the harm I did. But I think that's being in business. I think, when you're in business and you think you know a few things and then you do those things wrong, the results can be disastrous, and they were disastrous for me. So, a little bit of backstory. So, I had changed industries, not because I wanted to per se. Actually, that's not true. I did I did want to be I was in banking and wealth management, and I wanted to do something else. I really wanted to do something that was like what's called private equity, which is really just like, I'd always wanted to be a turnaround guy, like turn a company around. And I learned that you should be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. And it may not be exactly what you thought it was going to be. So I had always wanted to be like one of those guys that I saw, that we were on calls with when I was at JP Morgan and that had done these big turnarounds. I did not understand what that meant in the context of a small business. Because see, those guys didn't have any of their own, finance, own money at risk, um, or their livelihoods per se. So anyway, so I always wanted to learn how that was, and I didn't really have an industry in mind. And then, I got the opportunity, and but it wasn't at the time. I didn't want the opportunity. So I've told different versions of this story on a couple of my previous lives, but I'll just kind of really quickly just kind of get into the backstory. So I had been in a very rough place personally. I had lost I had no net worth anymore. In fact, I had a pile of debt. Um, I was, I had, sold what I owned, like my shares in my business, um, back to my partner. I sold what I owned for pennies on the dollar, for not very much. So it didn't last very long. And, so I was really not in a position when I was hired as an estimator in a masonry restoration business. I was not in a position, one, to say no to that job, like to say no. Two, I didn't have any other offers. So I, needless to say, so it was really more about just collecting a paycheck when I was hired. But then I saw, okay, these guys actually like the customers, that the people that hired us, like they loved it, most of them. But the business was not a good business. The business itself was rough, like the business of the business, if that makes any sense. So, and it was real rough. Like it was like, so when I came in, they were having a pretty good year, which they needed to have, because it was, they had 3 years where on a net basis, when it was like they had lost almost $290,000 over the last 3 years, so where was that money? I think a lot of you men and women will know. It was with, there were high interest loans. There were a bunch of vendors that hadn't gotten paid, and some of them hadn't been paid in like 3 years. And, and there was, the owner had some personal debt, and it was just used his home equity line, and just a whole lot of stuff, like not, basically anywhere and everywhere they could get cash, he had gone to get cash, or just had not paid folks and whatever. So, it was rough. It was a rough scene. And, that was my first time, like and the business I had started with my partner, we had both had cash to start the business, and we both brought clients over from, our respective firms. So, we definitely had to, like, we came out of pocket a lot, but we, sort of planned for it and had some cash to do that. So anyway, It was so this is my first time of like having this experience of like, vendors are calling literally 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 calls a day, if not sometimes more, sometimes a dozen. The bookkeeper is going out of his mind and is just really, I mean, it was crazy dysfunctional. I was like literally like being thrown into a fire and I didn't know anything. So, I learned as much as I could. The owner wasn't particularly good at training. I don't think most are. Most operators aren't really great at training other people. So, I mean, a lot of it was me asking a lot of questions and trying to build some sort of like organization around, estimating masonry restoration. But there were things I could plug into. So, as a guy that had come from finance, the companies, the companies, the books, I mean, it was rough. Like there were things were not, I mean, the books were, I would say, okay, I don't want to take away from the guy that was doing them, but like there was so much that was really, really like, it was rough. In fact, they had tried to get with like a couple of banks to get to do like a consolidation loan. And like literally the banks wouldn't even talk to them. They're like, get more organized and call us back. I mean, literally that was the feedback from banks. And again, that was just like mind boggling to me. So I kind of took that over and I worked with the bookkeeper and I started like I kind of reached out to some folks and kind of started making some calls to see, to see if I could get like a connection with a couple of the commercial banks in the area, Western Pennsylvania. So it worked, and I connected with the guy, and then connected with a handful of banks that actually, we I kind of got I got excuse me, got things together, reports and things like that, and kind of got us organized, built a very rough financial plan. So at least we could say, at least we could point to a plan that we were managing to. And so kind of did those basic things that I had learned about, previously that knew we needed to have. And, and so we actually were then in the process of refinancing all this debt away from like all the vendors that hadn't gotten paid, like putting that in, and then it ended up being a pretty substantial, like almost $1 million package, but worked on that for 6, 7, 8 months. So I was kind of that I was able to add value there, but one of the mistakes I made, and this is more of like a human thing, but maybe you can relate. So one of the mistakes I made was I had really good chops around finance and banking and wealth management because that's what I had done for at that point 15 years, right around 15 years. So so I was really good at it. And I made the young man's mistake. That was 7 years ago. I just turned 40. I made the young man's mistake of thinking that like translated, you know, like translated over like more than it did to other things like construction. So, and I was able to add immediate like value. I came in and we had bid like a 400, 450, 500, between 400 and $500,000 job on a big hospital. And while I didn't know the scopes of work and I didn't at that point, I mean, literally I'd been there less than 8 weeks. So I didn't understand tuck pointing and brick replacement. I mean, I understood functionally what that was, but I mean, I didn't, caulking and all that, all the stuff that ended up, you know, learning about bidding, doing millions of dollars worth. I did not know what that stuff was. So I didn't know what the scopes of work were, but I could negotiate if I knew like the price range, on say, like I ended up negotiating on caulking. If I knew what the range was and like what was our drop dead number, like I could negotiate any number. Right. So anyway, I negotiated that deal, and actually, while the owner was away on vacation, and we got the contract like a few days later. So, and that was actually the largest and most profitable contract that the business did that year. So, I was able to plug into like little things like that, and it gave me this false sense of confidence. So then, I made the mistake of I did a couple of things that were really stupid. All right. One, I didn't really know. So today I understand, and maybe you do or you don't, and this will be helpful. So businesses have a life cycle, right? And so there's a complicated way to explain that and an easy way to explain it. I'm going to give you the easy way. So like by a life cycle, I mean, the business has, um, it's almost like a human, right? So, when you make an investment into a business, it now is a business, right? But you don't have any revenue or customers. So all you really have, like if you're holding your infant, is just pride of ownership. Like, this is my little baby and I'm going to nurture it and do everything I can to help it grow and be strong, but it can't do anything. I mean, infants are completely helpless, right? Just like a new business. So, and then the business sort of progresses just like we do as a human, right? So business goes from infancy to toddler, and toddler, now you have like basically, you're not running the toddler's running you. Anyone who has kids knows exactly what I mean. You're just trying to keep up with them. And it's like that with a toddler business. So it's management by crisis. So you're not out there managing stuff. The crises are coming and you just got a fire hose or two or five, and you're just pointing it at the fires. And then you go into like sort of preteen adolescence, and that's when the business is growing, right? And so the business is growing, like having teens, they're growing, they're growing faster than you can keep up with. And for a business, growth usually means a lot more revenue, but you're not as profitable. Okay. So I'm going to stop there, and there's more, but I'm going to stop there. So, and I learned, by the way, like some of that particular, like I got that from Tony Robbins' Business Mastery, like amazing. So there's multiple other life cycles. We're going to stop there because the business that I came into, they were a toddler business, even though it was 39 years old at the time, or 37, between 37 and 39 years old at the time. So it was more than 30 years old. It was a toddler business, meaning like it was just every day. It was like you just came in, strapped in, and it was like problems just rolled in like a tidal wave, which was crazy to me, but it was also, that was reality. So again, going back to, the business had lost for 3 years, had lost, like I said, just under $300,000, owed everybody. And what I should have done is I didn't know that. What I just explained to you, I didn't know. Okay. So I didn't really understand. I came into a toddler business. I mean, I could see that it was struggling. And this wasn't this wasn't because they had lost somebody. This is the way the business ran. What I should have done is I probably should have evaluated where the business, like what was working, right? And I should have like dug into the things that first year that worked, and like the jobs that performed and the jobs that didn't perform. And I should have torn those apart to see like what the common threads were, because I would have seen stuff that I saw later on after losing almost 900 grand in over 2 years. So I should have dug into what was working and done more of that. Had I done that, I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I made, which were a couple things. One, I pulled, so we had a very, very basic marketing strategy, which was basically a letter, like 8.5 by 11 letter that we sent out, like just a mailer that sent from the office. And that was basically our direct mail campaign. So we didn't use a third party. It was all done in house, which, is the most expensive way to do it by far. Also was very, I'm going to say ineffective, because we didn't, like we weren't tracking anything. So we didn't know. We would get calls back, but it was like, it was really get some random, like a lot of random stuff. And we weren't like, just, there was not a lot of thought around who was getting the mailers. And, I mean, we were sending them to churches, for example, but, like that was it. I mean, we weren't, and maybe people we'd worked for. So there wasn't a lot of thought around it. And I didn't have the data. So I didn't have information, but I didn't shut that down, but we stopped doing like probably 80% of the stuff we were sending out. We didn't send out. We went and signed up for like Dodge and a few other of these, these resources that post like public jobs. And that was a disaster. Like that was a full on disaster because I killed the thing that was generating more higher quality leads, and then spent money on the thing that was getting us not garbage leads because they were public jobs, but I mean for us, for what we could handle, it was the were not good leads, right? So, and here's what I mean by that. So, the we were going out to like churches, again, private organizations, so churches and some few architects, few general contractors that we had worked with, but now we were bidding on, like a courthouse and XYZ municipality, or an old train station or apartment building. And again, these were had public, like basically tax dollars that were paying for a lot of them, if not all of them. So with that, you get a bunch of it's. I mean, those of you who know, it's infinitely more complicated. So anyone who's done commercial work is like probably shaking their head right now, going, "Yeah, yeah, you're right." So one, you have a sort of an administrative hierarchy of people that have to like basically sign off on everything, right? So now you've got not just like the owner or the owner's rep, but you've got an architect involved, and they're now, and usually, and a lot of these jobs, the architects would, sign off on a lot of stuff. And nothing against architects. I've worked with some brilliant architects. And I mean, it's incredible. I mean, the work they do is incredible. So I'm not in any way shitting on architects, but like a lot of these, some of them were really, really poor administrators and poor project managers, and you're at their mercy, right? And so it was a complicated approval structure, right? And then, we weren't getting paid for 90, 120 days, and we couldn't afford that. I mean, we literally couldn't afford it. And on top of that, we were paying higher because we were a non-union company or open shop. And so we were also paying essentially double the labor rates when you had the additional hourly and then the fringe benefits. And it was just so, and then you have to report, you have to submit payroll docs, to prove, can't remember the term right now, but it was a term that we knew very well around the office, to verify that you were basically paying people the right way. To had to submit those to the general, and then they would submit them, on up the line to the architect and so on and so forth. So all these people, so you had all these layers of approvals and submittals. And then of course there's the specs, the way the jobs were spec'd. I mean, it was brutal. And that's what I signed. I didn't know. So I didn't know at the time that I was basically taking us from a very simple structure where you'd have a private owner that would call, want the work. We would go in, bid the work, and use the materials we wanted to use that obviously were, quality commercial materials, but we weren't, but we didn't have all this burden in terms of submittals and all the stuff that, you know, that we had to do over here in the public jobs. And so it was like, it was a night. And on top of that, we were doing a lot of historical stuff. So there's this historical standards that were layered into that. I mean, dude, it was a nightmare. And I took us there. So it took me a couple of years to realize. So one, I saw that we were, I started like, I started to evaluate more, especially as we lost more and more money. I started to evaluate more. So like in the first year, my first year as CEO, we lost 580, between 550 and $600,000. It was a lot. The next year we lost like 200, 250, 270. So between 250 and 300, I believe. So it was, again, we almost $900,000 over 2 years. And, in the back half of the second year, so that was 2018, I really started to pay attention to like, what is the, like, what's the common thread between the jobs that, so I started evaluating the jobs that went really well, that we made a lot of money on. And I started evaluating the jobs that we were losing on. And when I did more evaluation, I started to see, I started to see those, like, basically, if I boil it down, and this again, some of you are like, duh, you didn't figure that out. Like, I mean, I didn't. I started to see that it was like basically complexity was the enemy of our profitability. So as you dialed up the complexity on a job, didn't matter if it was public or private or historical or just commercial, or, didn't matter. And it didn't matter if it was restoration or just repair work. It was if it was the jobs that were more complex, whether it was the job site, the site itself and access to the parts of the building we had to work on, because that was a complexity, even on like just simple retail residential jobs that sometimes we got wrapped around the axle on, or where we were staging in certain neighborhoods, like in Pittsburgh, and like because Pittsburgh's kind of a it's like a city like Chicago or some of these other large cities where you have like there's downtown, but then there's all these like city neighborhoods, right? And the city neighborhoods have or parking is really, really tough. And so we had to really be smart about where we dropped our machines, because we're dropping these like 60, 80 foot, aerial lifts. And so anyway, so I learned to essentially to manage the complexity. And so the more complexity there was, the less likely one we were to take the job. And also when we had a job that had a higher level of complexity, we would price the job higher, right? So it had a meaningful, so that one lesson of like complexity and profitability had this what you would call inverse relationship. So the higher the complexity, the lower the profitability. The lower the complexity, the higher the profitability. And we started getting so we started making solutions to lower the complexity, right? So for example, one of the things that became a part of our process is that I would go in and had a very simple like evaluation template that I would go into every job that we are going to bid. I'm going to pause there. So when leads came in, because what ended up happening is that we like when job leads would come in, I trained our staff. I was like, we're probably going to need to say no to like half of these job leads. Because even though we were going out looking for a particular kind of job, particular kind of like project, and, we want to do private, not public. And so we had these sort of parameters that we built around our target customer, or dream buyer, dream customer, whatever. So even though we had that, it, we still got calls to, do stuff that, again, that was outside of our wheelhouse, like repair like a brick, mailbox. I mean, that's for some guys, that's great work. For us, we were doing like, 6, 8 million, multiple year, multi-million dollar jobs. That job wasn't, that was a job that wasn't a good job for us. And so I kind of coached and trained our team on that, so that when we actually got to a job site, if I was going to like do a takeoff, like this was a took that we wanted, right? So we had a pretty good practice of, disqualifying stuff before someone ever took the time and went out and spent time and burned cash going out to look at something. All right. So when I'd get there, I'd have this template and we would look for those complexities. Like when, in the last 4 years I was in the business, we'd get there and look at the site conditions, right? And, and look at if there were prints, look at the prints and look at the plan to understand like what's going to happen here and what do we need to plan for now, right? So little things that I would put into our contracts, like I started putting where we were going to stage. I would look at the job site, and if they didn't have a specific staging area, because some didn't, some of these private jobs, then I would say we're going to stage here. And then I would talk to, if I was bidding to general or bidding to an owner, depending, I would talk to the person I was bidding to and go, we want to stage here. Is there any reason we can't stage there? And they would say yes or no. And if they, in some cases, they would want a staging far away. And so then I would build in material handling into the job so that I counted for distance, having to go back to the trailer, go back to, the job box, whatever. So, we did things to take that complexity and bring it down, right? So, because I mean, look, you're always going to have complexity. If you just take jobs that are super simple, you're going to make a lot of money, but there's not going to be a lot of jobs. So, you have to so you have to take jobs, especially when we were doing a lot of historic restoration, they're complex. They're going to be complex no matter what. So part of what I saw my job as was to build systems and processes to bring that complexity down, right? So we did that through through looking at the site conditions and writing stuff in. So I would write into I would write into my quote, which became a part of the contract. I would write in that we were staged here, and I would put a maximum distance and say, if we're staged farther away than this distance to this point, I would mark it on I would mark something, and I would put it into the contract that it was going to be a change order, right? Because I hadn't accounted for that. So what that led to was I didn't ever have to charge anyone for that, because what ended up happening is the foreman or superintendent would then accommodate me, because they didn't want to have the conversation with their boss about, well, it's in the contract and we have to do a change order. They didn't want to do change order over something so small. So generally speaking, we ended up, getting the best possible staging. And those are the little things that end up being really, really important to the bottom line, right? Because you've had jobs, right? I've had jobs where your staging is in BFE and your men are going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you lose. It's expensive, right? So the challenge with that is it took me 2 years to learn that lesson. And it probably took me that's not true. It probably took me another 2 years to really build it into the process, to the systems and the way we were doing takeoffs and managing work and so on and so on. So, so it's amazing that such a little thing, you think of complexity, that's a little thing, but it's those little things that cost the most amount of money. So anyway, while it was a painful lesson, today, so here's how I apply that today. So today I look at failure, right? Mistakes, call it whatever you want. I look at those as really beautiful gifts. And I'm not trying to be cheesy here, but I mean, I really mean it, because, and even up until, even last year was my last year in production. I left in December. I mean, I was doing this, regularly as the CEO and as the project manager running all the big jobs, and I kind of coached my men and my teams on this, let's these mistakes, these things, even if they're expensive, you're never going to get more valuable information than you're going to get from failure, right? Because you've learned what does not work. And you've also should learn not to do it again, right? Do it a different way. And the thing that I don't have time to get in today is, I tried, there were a lot of things that I tried that did not work, but I was quick to stop those things, right? And look at it again. So there's probably a handful of reasons why we went from losing, 800 plus, almost $900,000 to making almost $1 million a year, for 3 years. One of those is that I was looking at jobs regularly. So I was doing that, both evaluating mine and the owners and our other salesperson as the estimator. So I was evaluating them regularly. So I could see the themes, right? And I was evaluating mine too. I was evaluating all of them. So, I learned to look at the things, look at the failures in a different light. And because I was making, so going back to my first couple of years, I mean, I didn't look at the jobs, I didn't look at the jobs enough. Right. And there's more to that. Our bookkeeper at the time was extremely unorganized, which I think it was his way of trying to keep his job because he was always like, I'm so buried. And so like you couldn't get you the information you wanted. And anyway, real bizarre. But so it was, I wouldn't get a P. I mean, I wouldn't have a, P&L for months, right? For the company, it'd take like 90 days. If it was August, I'd have May's P&L or April's P&L, which is basically worthless. So, I looked at a lot more, and I don't have time to get into all the things I looked at, but I was looking at a lot of very important information a lot, like often. And so because of that, I was able to make decisions more quickly and make changes more quickly, whether it was at the job level or at the company, they call enterprise level, for your teams, like your crew or, company decisions on compensation and things like that. I was able to make better decisions more quickly because I had a lot of information. And I did the opposite of what I did in the first 2 years. In the first 2 years, I didn't look at enough information, didn't have the information, I didn't look at it. And then over the last 4 years in the business, I was always looking at information, always looking at like, taking it as feedback, looking at the jobs that didn't perform, again, whether it was mine or someone else's, and looking at why, and evaluating why, and then making smart decisions on, making changes, make, better solutions or whatever. And that's the game, that's the game. And of course, I also recognize then, going back to what I was sharing about the whole, about a business that was in toddler. So we went from toddler to like teenager to actually like to the next phase. And again, I'm not going to get into all that, where we were actually like moving towards a business that was ready to scale. So, you know, understanding some of those sort of like basic, what I'll call like blocking and tackling things ended up being really critical. And are the reasons why, I, as a guy that, had very little experience in the industry, was able to accomplish some pretty meaningful things in such a short period of time. Because I'm not like, I mean, I'm not any more talented than anybody else. I'm probably just more obsessed maybe than some with getting a solution, getting it right. And so, I think that again, I made better evaluations. I was obsessed with making better evaluations and finding the thread in these big failures that, ultimately took me to what I needed to fix, because then I could just look at anything, knowing the complexity, simplicity scale, right? So knowing that as we went up complexity, we were likely going to make less money, then I could I look at the where it was, before I started working on it, and then we could bring the complexity down again with our, who was working the job, with what we brought to the job, because we then had tools, right? So we went from having, these crappy trucks to having really nice new utility bed trucks with my top two people had 24-foot trailers. We'd roll up with those. And so now we've got basically like a mobile shop, right? So, and some of you do that and you're shaking your heads like, yeah, like we'd have saws and blades and grinders and plenty of, uh, GCFIs, plenty of cables and extension cords and plenty of hoses and on and on and on. So that, like, again, I had a functional shop on our big projects right there, just like a general would, or, like a big shop. We would roll up and have, like, again, we'd have a mobile warehouse right there at the job site. And then we did that across all of our jobs with smaller, 16-foot, 12-foot, et cetera, et cetera. So we were able to then take complex jobs and take the complexity out of them by having a system and having the tools that brought that down, if that makes any sense. So anyway, you know, the skill, and I think and I'm sharing that today because that, if you look at your own business, and look at like like your sort of like complex scale, like just, I mean, it's real simple. Like you can go like, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being super simple, 10 being super complex, where is this on that scale? And, if a lot of the things you do are super complex, that's something to pay some attention to, right? Because the more complex things are, the more difficult it is for our brains to, keep all of it in our short-term memory, So, something that, so if there's two things I would hope you take away from this, or one, um, failure is rich in information if you look for it. By looking for it, I mean evaluate. I mean, I spend more time on the failures than I do the wins. And two, one of the easy hacks for making things better is looking at the level of complexity of that process, of what kind of jobs you're doing, et cetera, of what you're asking of your people. Because again, as you ratchet up, if you want to think about it, like your people, like if you ratchet up the complexity, the competency is going to go down. Does that make sense? So as it gets more complex, the competency is going to go down. Vice versa, as it gets less complex and more simple, competency is going to go up. So I hope this doesn't offend anybody as too simple, because I believe that it's some of the biggest solutions that have the most dollars and cents tied to them in profitability are some of the things that are the simplest things. And I mean, I can tell you, I don't really talk about this a lot, but my jobs, when I left the company last year, I was doing between 75 and 80% gross profit on my jobs. So what most people's cost structure was my profit structure. So my profit and costs for my jobs was literally flip-flop to what most people's is. And I'm not sitting here trying to brag. I say that because what I'm telling you worked on a major, and it's not just, we're not talking about like little rinky-dink jobs. We were doing, 2, 3, 5, 8, $100,000 $1 million jobs, and some of them over multiple years. So we were doing larger and more complex commercial and historical restoration type jobs, and it works. So anyway, so I hope this is helpful. I am here again every Monday at noon Eastern time. And we'll be here every Monday at noon Eastern time for the foreseeable future. And I'm here because I don't, it's not like I want to hear myself speak. I'm here to bring value to this community that we have built and are still building, because I would have, I don't know, I would have given I don't know, an appendage, a finger, or maybe a small vital organ to have some access to some of the things that we're bringing, someone or someone's in this case with Jay and myself, where we've done this stuff. We've done it and we've done it wrong. And we then did it right to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. So, so I'm here because I have a deep conviction about helping other contractors with some of those things. Because if I can give you one thing that saves you some heartache, or keeps that key employee from quitting, or helps you make money on that big job, to me that's the game here. That's the juice. That is the juice for me, because it's that's cool. I mean, that's a big part of why I'm here, helping Jay with this, is that again, I didn't find Jay until I'd already kind of gotten over the hump, and then we were able to refine a lot of things. I mean, we got tons of really cool stuff done together, but I would have killed to have found him, in 2018 when I was getting killed. So anyway, so I'm here every Monday at 12, because I'm really passionate about this and want to bring solutions and tools and stuff that can bring value to your businesses. And then Jay and I go live. We go live every Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern, doing the same thing. We get we talk about some of the same things, but a lot of times we do these mini trainings as well. So, whatever your bag is, come check us out. or on replay, really doesn't matter. I mean, I like seeing, I mean, I can see who's, how many people are on up in the corner of my screen here, but I don't really, as long as you get it, that's really all that and even if you jump on for 15 minutes and watch 15 minutes, that's great too. So anyway, I'm here every Monday at 12 Eastern. Jay and I are on every Friday at 3 Eastern, bringing as much value as we possibly can to chock this group full of value. Great stuff, great plays, great strategies, great tactics to help you crush and grow your businesses, scale your businesses, make them more profitable. Whatever your outcome is, there's something in here. So everyone who's been on with me, thank you for being on today. And I'll see you Friday, and then I'll see you again next Monday.